Because Black people have been conditioned through white social engineering to study thoroughly only our Bibles, we are therefore easy victims of those who have instead thoroughly studied how to manipulate the human mind. Our core problem is that most Black people are totally clueless of how white oppressive forces exploit their monopoly over information that we receive to manipulate our beliefs in ways that serves their white society. Those Black people who do not critically think never notices their mental change. Case, point, and proof. When critically thinking, have you ever noticed that the results of virtually all health studies that we receive from white sources favors themselves over Black people? When critically thinking about it, can't you see just how ridiculously unrealistic this scenario actually is? It's in fact cartoonishly unrealistic to have study results so one-sidedly favoring one racial group over another, as we're experiencing whites favoring over Blacks. It's actually fraudulent propaganda. According to white social scientists, people are inherently tribal and therefore do not naturally accept the long-term dominance of other racial groups over their lives. People must be manipulated to do so. By constantly inundating Black people with fraudulent propaganda favoring whites over Blacks, this subliminally embeds into the subconscious minds of many Black people the falsehood that whites are inherently superior to Blacks and are therefore supposed to rule over us. This psychological warfare system is in fact so proficient that it not only makes Black people more compliant with white dominance over our lives, it in many cases causes Black people to even prefer white dominance over our lives. White social scientists describe this nefarious practice as merely instilling a value system into the subordinate population that makes them adhere to the authority and existing infrastructure of the dominant culture. This is what's being done to us by the white society through their monopoly over information that we systematically receive. It's how the white society protects itself from massive unified Black retribution and rebellion. Until Black people elevate our minds above a biblical fairy tale and the silly slave syndrome myth, we will remain forever mentally enslaved by white oppressive forces who have studied how to manipulate our minds to think in ways that serves their interests. As I've stated earlier, our core problem is that most Black people are totally clueless of how white propagandists exploits their monopoly over information that we receive to manipulate our minds and our beliefs in ways that serve the system of white supremacy. This is why those who know the truth must teach. African proverb. Black people, in order to truly liberate ourselves, we must elevate our minds above a biblical fairy tale and a silly slave syndrome myth. Usually people have the right to believe whatever they choose to believe. However, there's a profound exception to this rule when it comes to the oppressed. The oppressed must gain a clear, concise, and accurate understanding of our plight and condition. Because if our understandings are flawed, then all liberating remedies that stem from those misunderstandings will also be flawed. The oppressed must function based upon what's true in order to liberate ourselves. The truth of our plight and condition is that although most Black people don't experience the type of blatant white racist subjugation tactics as our grandparents experienced it, we're still being subjugated by racist tactics by the white society. However, it's now being done with much more sophistication. Unlike the blatant white racist subjugation tactics of the past that Black people could easily identify and therefore develop counter strategies and unify ourselves against, the modern systems are not easily recognized nor easily comprehended by the Black victims. The subjugation of Black people always works best when the Black victims no longer recognizes it. The truth of our plighted condition is that black people are within a trauma-bounded relationship with a white narcissistic society that gaslights us unrelentingly. The term gaslighting is usually associated with individual abusive relationships wherein which one person is mentally abused for the benefit of another. However, that same gaslighting tactic is being used on a larger scale wherein which black people are being mentally abused for the benefit of the white society. The white society's trauma bonding of black people is wherein which, after brutally traumatizing black people for many centuries, the white society now inundates black people with fraudulent, black racially demoralizing, black racially devaluing, and black white disapproving propaganda about ourselves to such an extent that rather than us appropriately wanting to separate from the white society, we've instead become so ashamed of ourselves that we work hard to gain the approval of the white society. It's an insidious psychological warfare manipulation process that's used on targeted populations to break us down and to get us to abandon our loyalty to our own cause and our own self-interest, and instead to become completely dedicated to serving our captors. It's similar to how mistreated animals stay loyal to their abusive owners. It's like an involuntary reflex. People are easily manipulated when they don't know what's being done to them. It's by deliberate design that many black people are now self-loathing, perceives ourselves as being our own worst enemies, and reveres and defend Caucasians in spite of such a brutally horrific history of white oppression against our ancestors. This noted mindset among black people clearly benefits the white society. It's always by deliberate design whenever the oppressed are thinking exactly as the oppressors wants them to think. The white media's unrelenting negative depiction of black people that constantly subjects us to receiving only the fraudulent worst narratives and images about ourselves is so much more than just biased media reporting. It's actually a black racially demoralizing divide and conquer psychological warfare propaganda campaign. Demoralized divide and conquer is the method of maintaining control over a targeted population through unrelenting demoralization in order to create self-loathing and division amongst them. This condition makes the targeted population much more easier to be controlled and subjugated. All societal narratives about black people comes exclusively from the white society. Therefore, black people interpret our collective state according to information presented by white people. This, in fact, literally means that white people owns black people's interpretation of ourselves. White social scientists determined a long time ago that by perpetually negatively distorting what black people believes about ourselves collectively, they could demoralize us, divide us, create black self-loathing, and also shift black collective aggressions away from the white society and redirect it towards ourselves. They determined that as long as they kept black people within this condition, they could then rule over us forever. This control system works by tapping into the immense power that shame has upon the human mind to mentally enslave millions of black people. It is the truth of our plighted condition. This system is deployed like a massive media marketing campaign that constantly subjects black people to receiving only the fraudulent worst narratives about ourselves. Within this system, fraudulent black racially demoralizing and racially devaluing propaganda is being pumped unrelentingly into the unsuspecting minds of the black population without being challenged nor counterbalanced by an equal amount of black positive racially affirming information. Its weapon is the message that it carries and the way that it adversely affects the black population in terms of our behavior. It conveys a subliminal message that black people are now our own worst enemies, and that we therefore need whites to govern over our lives. Moreover, that black people should admire, respect, and trust only whites. They also constantly push the narrative onto black people that alleges that it's ourselves that are now our own worst enemies. Many may assume that given the white society's horrific mistreatment of black people throughout history, that most black people would therefore dismiss such a ridiculous claim. However, because that narrative is being so heavily propagated, many black peoples do accept it as being true. This system is extremely effective because when black people are repetitively presented these narratives from trusted white media sources, it can be very difficult to resist its implied propaganda programming, especially when the propaganda is being told daily and so unrelentingly. With time, being unable to refute the constant negative information being told about ourselves, many black people internalizes it and accepts it as being true. This unconsciously influences how many black people perceive our communities, creating division and self-hatred among our group. It is how they turn our collective aggressions away from the white society and redirect it towards ourselves. This is the truth of our planting condition. It has nothing to do with a silly slave syndrome myth. This is all possible because people are like computers. All you have to do is keep giving them certain information every so often, and you can persuade and steer an entire generation towards an implied objective. It doesn't matter if the information presented is untrue. Most people will act upon it because they've all been given the same information. It is time for us to elevate our minds and see the truth. The human mind is like a computer. Regardless of how efficient it may be, its reliability is only as great as the information being fed into it. If it's possible to control the input into the human mind, then no matter how intelligent a person may be, it's entirely possible to control what people will believe. This is our hidden reality. Because white people controls all of the societal narratives that are routinely fed into the collective minds of black people. This allows white oppressive forces to shape our beliefs in ways that serve their white society. This is the true reason why many black people are now self-loathing, perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemies, and reveres and defend Caucasians in spite of such a brutally horrific history of the contrary. This brainwashing system is extremely effective. Many black people insist that they confirm their negative assessment based upon their own experiences. However, in reality, that's not true. It's not humanly possible to confirm our negative assessment of millions of people based upon anyone's individual experiences. It's not humanly possible. Our negative perception of our racial group comes from the white society who controls our narrative, our media images, and everything. The reason why many black people insist that they have confirmed their negative assessment is because once a false belief has been successfully embedded into the human mind, the individual will then only notice those incidents that appears to confirm the embedded belief and becomes psychologically blinded from seeing the greater amount of evidence refuting the embedded belief. They will then insist that they've seen with their own eyes that the embedded belief is true, although it's in fact not. When people are constantly inundated with negative lies about themselves, those lies become their reality. They begin to see only those things that appear to confirm the lie. White oppressive forces thoroughly studied this mental phenomenon and weaponized it against black people. This psychological warfare program is extremely effective, and it is the system that a white society now deploys against black people. It is a reality that we must recognize. It is at the root of the feelings of self-hatred and division that profoundly affects black people and is at the root of the false internalized feeling of superiority that many whites possess. All societies function based upon the narratives that are repetitively fed into a society. As a means of maintaining white dominance, the narratives fed into our society exalts whites and marginalizes black people. This creates false assumptions within society that the society functions based upon in ways that aids in maintaining white dominance over black people. We have to learn the social sciences that are being used for maintaining white dominance. Our plight has nothing to do. When we post online about a biblical fairy tale or Willie slave syndrome, our enemies are laughing at our profound ignorance. They're laughing at how stupid those ideology sounds. They are social sciences that are being employed against us, true social sciences. Elevate your mind and learn the truth. We have now been in America for over 400 years. If you're still believing that our plight is connected to a Bible brutally beaten upon our ancestors, but now set us free, it's because you are ignorant. Whenever people are ignorant, they'll always believe nonsense. If our plight was truly of the Bible, then we would have left America in the year 2019, because that was when we reached the 400-year anniversary of being in America. Our condition has nothing to do with a silly slave syndrome myth. The Willie Lynch never existed. The letter is a work of fiction. This is why when experts examined the letter, they found it had modern words in it inconsistent with a 1700 date. Willie Lynch never existed. Moreover, that's not how true brainwashing of people is achieved. Black people, it's time to elevate our minds from our ignorance. It's time. We are the people who civilized the world. We're the people who built the pyramids. And we're sitting there allowing ourselves to be manipulated. They've dumbed down our minds to believe idiotic things that prevent us from gaining the proper understanding of our plight that's necessary in order to liberate ourselves. Black people in white society deploy social sciences against us. They've weaponized their monopoly of information that we receive to control what we believe in ways that serves and protects the system of white supremacy. It's time to wake up. One love and peace.